I work the midnight shift at a gas station off Rosedale Highway, one of those half-lit spots that still plays 80s rock through a tinny ceiling speaker. It's a quiet job: stock the coolers, balance the drawer, and nod at the occasional trucker. Policy says that after midnight, the doors stay locked. Anyone who wants something uses the drawer slot. Safer that way. The night outside can be a different world. That night, a foggy February one, I was labeling a tray of burritos when someone knocked. It wasn't a bang or a shout, just 3 soft taps. I looked up. A woman stood just beyond the glow of the security light, hands cupped to the glass. Her hair was damp, jacket zipped to her throat. No car at the pumps, no sound but the cooler behind me. She leaned closer, lips moving. "Please, my car died. Can I wait inside?" It's the kind of thing you hear sometimes. Usually it's a lie for warmth or a ride, but she looked terrified, like she'd run out of something more than gas. I pressed the intercom button. "Sorry, store's closed to walk-ins. You can sit on the bench under the light. I'll call a patrol to check on your car." She shook her head, voice trembling through the speaker. "Someone followed me. Please, just for a minute." I looked around, empty lot. Fog thick enough to swallow the edge of the pumps. I thought for a second, but then hit the buzzer. "Straight to the counter," I said, hands visible. She stepped inside, keeping close to the wall like she was afraid of being seen through the glass. Her eyes darted toward the door, then the windows. "You can lock it again," she said. "Please." I did. The lock thudded home, louder than usual. "Coffee?" I offered, because sometimes normal words keep a situation from unraveling. She nodded, wrapped her hands around the paper cup like it was medicine. "He followed me from the ramp," she said after a moment. He slowed down when I pulled over. Then he stopped ahead. I just ran. I called non-emergency, gave the dispatcher the details. They said a unit would come by soon. "You're safe here," I told her, and I meant it. But she wasn't acting like she believed me. She avoided standing directly under the camera and kept tugging her sleeves down over her wrists. When I asked her name, she paused. "Marcy," she said finally, but it didn't sound real. She stared at the back hallway. "That door, does it lock?" "Twice," I said. "I checked it earlier." She nodded but didn't look relieved, just thoughtful. For a few minutes I went back to wiping the counter, trying not to stare. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass. Then came a knock from somewhere near the side window. Not loud enough to be sure of. Not soft enough to ignore. I froze with the rag still in my hand, scanning the reflections. Nothing but my own face and the bright "no cash kept after hours" sign. "Probably the building's settling," I said automatically. She looked up fast. "He does that," she whispered. "Taps first." A chill rippled through me. "You said your car broke down. Did you see who was following you?" She shook her head. I didn't look back. I walked the short hall to the back door anyway, turned both deadbolts, pressed my shoulder to the metal until I felt its weight, solid. When I came back, she'd moved closer to the counter, eyes fixed on the front glass like she expected it to move. "You okay?" I asked. She didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on the convex mirror above the snack aisle, watching the reflection of the entrance. "He waits like that," she said finally. "Still. So you think he's gone?" I followed her line of sight. Just the empty lot, but I noticed something else. Her jacket sleeve had slipped, showing a white hospital band, edges frayed. She tugged it back quickly. "Marcy," I said carefully. "Are you hurt?" "No. Do you need medical?" "No, just tired." There's a kind of tired that sounds like surrender. I didn't push her. The phone buzzed. Dispatcher checking back units on the way. 10 minutes. Copy, I said, because that word feels like control. A few minutes later, headlights appeared through the fog, too slow for highway traffic. They crawled along the service road behind the station, then disappeared behind the dumpsters. No engine sound after that. Just stillness. Marcy's hands tightened on the cup. "He's here," she said softly. I reached under the counter, touched the baseball bat I kept there more for comfort than defense. The motion sensor by the ice freezer blinked once, then twice, then stopped. Could have been a raccoon. Could have been the wind, but the timing felt wrong. When the patrol finally rolled up, blue lights washing the storefront, I almost exhaled. 2 officers stepped out. One motioned for me to stay put. The other spoke through the glass. I unlocked the inner door halfway. "She's inside," says someone followed her. The older cop nodded. "We'll talk to her." I turned. "They're here," I said. Marcy didn't move. "They're not here for me," she whispered. "They're here for him." The officers had her step outside while I stayed behind the counter. The younger one kept scanning the lot. The older talked to her in low tones. I watched through the glass, trying to read lips, but all I caught was her shaking her head and saying no over and over. After a minute, the older officer came back. "You let her in?" "Yeah, she said someone followed her." He sighed. "She's listed missing from a psychiatric facility in Tulare County. Walked out earlier tonight. You did fine calling it in." Behind him, she stood beside the cruiser, eyes fixed on me. She didn't look angry, just hollow. "Don't take me back to that man," she said suddenly. Not to the cop, to me. The older officer turned. "All right, ma'am, let's talk in the car." He guided her toward the open door. She didn't resist, just kept her eyes on the store until the cruiser door shut. When they drove off, I realized I was still holding the bat. I set it down, turned off the coffee warmer, and just listened. The quiet had waned again. About an hour later, CHP called to confirm. "No disabled vehicles reported near your exit," the dispatcher said. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the empty pumps. That should have been it. A weird night filed under stories for the next staff meeting, but my mind kept replaying her words. He followed me. What if she hadn't imagined it? A few days later, one of the officers stopped by for coffee. I asked if they ever found her car. He shook his head. Never saw one. "She's back in care, though. No harm done." Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "Guess she's had a few incidents like that before. Runs off, shows up somewhere, says she's being followed." "By who?" I asked. "She never says the same thing twice." I nodded, but something in me refused to let the story end that neatly. A week later, while restocking mints, I found a wadded paper towel behind the display. It was damp, folded into a small hard square. Inside, written in pencil, "He likes glass." I just stood there, reading it over and over. It wasn't proof of anything, but I couldn't throw it away. I put it in the drop safe, the same place we store cash, because I didn't know where else to keep someone else's fear. Now, when I work, I don't buzz anyone in. Not ever. I hand them what they need through the drawer, call for help first. I move the bench under the brightest light, right in view of the camera. I keep the bat closer, the dispatch number on speed dial. I've thought about her more than I probably should. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she was dangerous. Maybe she was right. Whatever the truth is, it lingers in this place. In the reflection of headlights moving too slowly past the pumps. You can't work nights without learning that danger doesn't always kick the door in. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it knocks politely. Sometimes it smiles through the glass and asks for warmth. And maybe that's what unsettles me most. That I opened the door once thinking I was helping. And I keep thinking that someone out there learned exactly how long it takes me to hesitate. When the morning shift arrives, I always give the same line. Quiet night. It's true enough. But every time the lock buzzes open for them, there's a brief echo from that night. Her voice small and steady. "Don't take me back to that man." The door clicks shut, and I start another shift, pretending the world outside the glass isn't still watching. Because here's the truth. Every night since, I've kept that folded paper towel in my wallet. Not for proof, for memory. A reminder that mercy and caution are a coin you can only spend once. Working the closing shift at a grocery store is one of those jobs that sounds uneventful until you're the one locking up. I'd been doing it for about 3 years by then, Saturday nights especially. We closed at 10. By 9:30, the floors were buffed. The aisles were half empty, and the playlist switched from upbeat pop to whatever instrumental stuff corporate thought would make people hurry up and leave. That night started normal. I had self-checkout duty while my manager on duty, Rachel, handled the end-of-night paperwork in the office upstairs. The store had that end-of-shift calm when everything hums but nothing moves. You could hear the squeak of a single cart from across the entire building. "10 minutes, folks," I called out, doing my usual sweep down the main aisle. "We're closing up." That's when I noticed him. A tall man standing dead still in the cereal aisle, reading the back of a box like he was studying for a test. Mid-40s maybe, beard, dark hoodie. He didn't seem drunk or high, just absorbed. "Need help finding something?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. He looked up with this slow, polite smile. "Just deciding," he said. "All right, we're closing in 10, so I'll be quick," he interrupted. Not unkindly, but something about the way he said it made me believe he wouldn't. Still, I didn't press him. People get weirdly defensive about cereal. At 10 sharp, the music cut off, the closing announcement played, and I locked the front doors. I watched through the camera feed as Rachel did her final sweep. Produce, frozen, dairy. When she came around to dry goods, the man was gone. She gave me a thumbs up through the security glass. 10:01, I said, clocking out of the register. He's gone, or I think he is. We started our usual routine. Count tills, dump trash, lights down one section at a time. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs softened, replaced by the muted whir of the HVAC. It always gets a little eerie after hours. You start hearing things you didn't notice before. The buzz of the freezers, the rattle of the ceiling vents, your own shoes squeaking. By 12:30, we were finishing inventory reports in the small upstairs office that overlooks the store floor. I was cross-checking spreadsheets when Rachel stopped typing. "Did you hear that?" she asked. I shook my head. Sounded like footsteps. There it was again. Creak, step, pause. It came from right above us. The narrow hallway where employees keep their lockers and uniforms. "Could be the pipes," I said, trying not to sound like I believed otherwise. "No," she said. "Listen." We both sat still. The sound was too heavy, too uneven for pipes. A few steps, then what sounded like a zipper sliding open. Rachel frowned, stood up, and grabbed the office flashlight. "Come on." The upstairs hallway always gave me weird vibes. It smelled faintly of detergent and metal, like an old gym locker. The walls were a dull beige that never quite looked clean, no matter how often maintenance painted them. We walked slowly, our footsteps echoing against the linoleum. The lockers lined both sides, all with cheap silver handles and combination locks. At the far end, near the emergency exit, a small window let in a square of orange light from the parking lot. Everything looked normal. No doors open, no signs of movement. Rachel crouched to check the floor. No muddy prints, no scuffs. Then she stopped. Behind the last row of lockers, barely visible from the hall, was a rolled-up sleeping bag. Next to it, 2 folded grocery bags, one filled with water bottles, the other with bananas and trail mix. "Somebody nested," Rachel whispered. A chill crept in. "You think he's still here?" She didn't answer. She just pointed to the ceiling vent above the lockers. The grate was slightly bent. We went back to the office, locked the door, and pulled up the camera feed. The screens showed every angle of the store floor. The aisles, the registers, the loading dock, but the upstairs hallway had no camera. The only coverage near it came from a feed showing the ladder that led from the back storage area to the upper maintenance level. Just below the roof, Rachel scrubbed back through the footage to around closing time. We watched the man from the cereal aisle, clear as day on camera 12. He grabbed a box of Frosted Flakes, pretended to read the back again, then looked around. When the last customer walked past, he drifted toward the rear of the store. At 9:55 p.m., the camera near the ladder caught a quick blur of movement. Just a shape, a shoulder, an arm, slipping upward into the shadows. Then nothing. I felt it in my gut. "He climbed up before we closed," Rachel said. "He's been up there the whole time." We locked the office door, killed the lights, and called the police. The dispatcher said units were en route, told us to stay put and stay quiet. The line went dead, leaving only the low sound of the computer and the low creak from above. We sat in silence, waiting. Another sound, this time from directly overhead. A shuffle, then a slow drag like someone moving their weight on a surface they didn't want to squeak. We didn't talk, didn't move, just listened. The noise came again, closer to the vent above the office. Then it stopped. The officers arrived around 1 a.m. 2 cruisers, their lights flashing blue and red through the glass. We met them at the loading dock, unlocked the back door, and explained everything. They moved in fast. One stayed downstairs, while 2 others took the stairwell to the employee area. We followed a few minutes later. The sleeping bag and supplies were still there, untouched. The officers fanned out, one shining his flashlight along the ceiling grid. "Hold on," one said, pointing to the vent. That's been moved." He stepped onto a chair, pushed up the ceiling tile, then lowered it again, motioning for his partner. They climbed up with the portable ladder for maintenance. I remember the sound of insulation crinkling, followed by one officer's voice. "Got something." A minute later, he emerged holding a pair of boots, muddy, worn through the soles. "They're still warm," he said, but whoever owned them was gone. They spent the next hour sweeping the roof, the ducts, and the loading dock area. The theory was that he'd slipped out the ladder access door that led to the side alley sometime between our call and their arrival. When they came back down, they took photos of the sleeping bag and the supplies, then left it all bagged as evidence. One officer, young, looked barely older than me, tried to reassure us. "You did the right thing," he said. "Probably just someone homeless looking for warmth. Still, smart you checked the cameras." I nodded, but the explanation didn't sit right. That setup behind the lockers wasn't desperation. It was routine. The sleeping bag was neatly rolled, the food sorted. Whoever it was had been staying there for a while. We reopened the next morning like nothing happened. The store didn't want word getting out. Corporate came in, reviewed security footage, and installed a badge lock on the upstairs door. Rachel and I were told to keep quiet about it. Something about avoiding unnecessary panic. But after that night, I couldn't unhear the sounds. Every little creak made me stop. A few days later, one of the maintenance guys, Mike, pulled me aside. "You hear what they found?" he whispered. "When they took down that ceiling panel, I thought he meant the boots." "No," he said. "They found insulation pulled back, like someone had been sleeping up there too." That explained the zipper sound. He'd probably been keeping his stuff in the vent cavity, sealing it up each morning before we opened. Mike grinned like it was a weird curiosity, but I didn't find it funny. I kept picturing that moment. Him slipping up the ladder at 9:55, silent while the rest of us were ringing out customers, watching us. A week later, I was alone in the office finishing reports when I heard the same creak again. Overhead. Same rhythm. I froze, then turned on the ceiling fan out of pure instinct, like noise would make me invisible. I told myself it was the building settling. That was before the dust drifted down from the vent above me. Just a pinch. Enough to make me get up and leave without finishing the report. The next morning, I told Rachel. She called maintenance again. They went up, checked everything. All clear, they said. I believed them because I had to. 3 weeks later, another store in our chain. Same layout, same region. Reported a break-in. The night staff found sleeping gear in the ceiling. No cameras caught anyone leaving there either. They thought maybe he was moving between stores. The company hired a third-party security firm after that. They added locks, cameras, motion detectors. But even now, whenever I work a late shift, I look up at the vents before I turn the lights off. I try not to think about it too much. Still, I switched departments soon after. I couldn't close anymore. Not after knowing that the quiet, locked building we thought was ours had someone else's heartbeat inside it. Now every time I walk past the cereal aisle, even as a customer, I check the ceiling first. Because once, I thought I knew who'd left the store, and I was wrong. I cleaned 12 floors every night. Same loop, vacuum, trash, bathrooms. My badge got me in at 9:45. My caddy rolled behind me like a tired pet. I'd keep one earbud in, one ear open. The building spoke if you listened. Vents sighing, pipes clicking, the elevator groaning to itself. The marble lobby always looked too clean to be real, the air sharp with polish. The mirror in the elevator was my only company. I'd watch myself shrink behind the reflection of the closing doors. Floor lights blinked in sequence. That quiet rhythm calmed me. By midnight, the city outside disappeared into glass reflections. I liked it better that way. No eyes watching. Floor 7 always slowed me down. It had a law office that never emptied their Keurig pods, and a women's restroom with a weirdly installed stall door. Decades ago, someone mounted it backward, hinges facing the wall. When it was closed, the door hid itself. You had to wedge sideways to reach the toilet. I used to laugh about it. Buildings had quirks. So did night crews. I'd leave that door open when I finished cleaning, just to remind myself the stall was done. A week into January, temperatures sunk below 10 degrees. On my second pass through 7, I noticed the door shut again. I'd left it open. I figured the draft from the vent must have nudged it, but the hinge was heavy. It didn't move easily. 2 nights later, it happened again. Open earlier, close later. I even checked the hinge. Stiff, no swing. I told myself not to think too hard. Once you start chasing weird, every sound turns into a ghost. At 2 a.m., I came back to mop the baseboards. Kneeling down, I ran the mop under each stall. Habit made me shine my flashlight beneath the backward one. And oh my, I remember it clear as day. I saw 2 bare feet, toes pointed toward me. No movement, no shoes in sight. For a second, my brain refused to label them as human, just shapes, pale and dusty. Then it clicked. Custodial, I said automatically. Buildings closed. I need you to answer. Nothing. I swallowed. Ma'am? Still nothing. The feet stayed perfectly still. My instincts split. One side said run, the other said don't turn your back. I backed out slowly, pushing the cart until its wheel bumped the doorframe. My phone was in my pocket, battery blinking red. No service bars in the center of the building. I grabbed the wall phone inside the janitor's closet. Dead tone. The radio on my hip? Static, then silence. Of course. The hall felt longer than usual. I looked back at the women's door. No movement. If someone was in there, I couldn't leave them alone. If someone wasn't, then I was staring at nothing and acting like a rookie. Neither option was good. I took the elevator down 2 floors to security. Luis, the overnight guard, was at his desk, sipping coffee from a thermos the size of a gas can. Problem? He asked. Maybe, I said. I saw feet, bare ones. 7th floor restroom. Door shut again. He didn't joke or question it. He just grabbed his key ring. We go together. The elevator ride back up felt wrong, like being swallowed by silence. When the doors opened, my cart waited in the hallway where I'd left it. The restroom door was shut. No footprints leading in or out. Luis held up his flashlight. You do the talking, he whispered. I stepped forward. Custodial. Security's with me. If you're in there, say something. Silence. Luis nodded toward the door. I pulled. It resisted, then gave way. Empty, toilet lit up. Tank lid shifted crooked. No feet, no dust smudge where they'd been. Luis checked the stalls one by one. Nothing, he said, then eyed the tank. Hold on. He lifted the lid. Inside, a Ziploc bag stuffed with a toothbrush and a cell phone sealed inside another baggie. We just stared. He lowered the lid carefully. Somebody lived in a bathroom stall, he said. He called the second guard, Tori, and reported it to dispatch. While he talked, I stood in the doorway feeling every sound of the building. When the second guard arrived, they swept the stairwells and the mechanical room. No one. Luis sealed the items in a bag and logged the find. Possible overnight trespass. He told me to stick close until the sweep was done. Probably homeless, he said. He had that calm, practiced tone of someone who'd seen too much weird to be shocked. The next morning, the company told us not to mention it to tenants. Maintenance came and removed the faulty stall door. Safety upgrade, they said. Corporate loves euphemisms. I kept working. Nights don't stop for one strange incident. After that, security added hourly patrols between 1 and 5 a.m. Luis walked every floor, sometimes whistling softly so we'd know he was near. Maintenance started checking ceilings. The company promised to add cameras in employee areas. None of that erased the image of those feet, though. Back on my route, I couldn't stop the small paranoia habits. I'd knock before entering any restroom. I'd announce myself, even if I knew I was alone. I stopped wearing earbuds. Every creak made me pause. The janitor who covered floor 3 told me she'd found fresh dust trails under a stall the same week we'd discovered the stash upstairs. No feet, just a faint heel mark. Management brushed it off as residual traffic. Luis didn't. He started keeping a record book of every sound or sighting. You think this'll help? I asked. It helps me, he said. Buildings talk. You just need to remember what they said yesterday. For a week, nothing happened. The silence was almost worse. It gave space for imagination. Working nights changes how you think about buildings. You stop assuming emptiness equals safety. You learn that silence is active. It hides things until you trip over them. People imagine night crews as lonely but peaceful. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes you hum to your vacuum, talk to yourself, count hours until dawn. But every so often you feel a pause in the rhythm, like someone else inhaled at the same moment you did. That's what fear really is on night shifts. Not screams, not jump scares. Just realizing the building's breath doesn't match yours. I stayed another year before switching jobs. On my last week, I wrote a little reminder on a Post-it and stuck it inside my cart, behind the disinfectant bottle where no one else would notice. Next story. I'm a 31-year-old insurance agent, and after a long week of dealing with policies, claims, and endless phone calls, I enjoy wandering through other people's cast-offs. I love coming across things that seem to carry their own little tale, something you can breathe new life into. Last month, on a Saturday morning, I was driving through a nearby neighborhood when I spotted a sign for a yard sale. It was one of those last-minute detours, the kind where you don't expect to find much, but end up stopping anyway. The house was modest, with a folding table set up on the driveway and a few random items scattered around. Books, kitchen gadgets, and a collection of tools that immediately caught my eye. Among the tools was a rusty, old-school red metal toolbox. It reminded me of the one my grandfather used to have in his garage when I was a kid. I could almost smell the motor oil and sawdust just looking at it. I opened it up and saw a few random tools inside, a couple of wrenches, some screwdrivers, and an old hammer with a worn wooden handle. Nothing fancy, but it felt like a little piece of nostalgia. "How much for this?" I asked the man running the sale, holding up the toolbox. He was an older guy, maybe in his 60s, with a weathered face and a calm demeanor. $10, he said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "Deal," I said, handing over the cash. We chatted for a minute or two about tools and how they don't make them like they used to. Then I carried the toolbox to my car and headed home, happy with my find. A week later, I'd almost forgotten about the toolbox. It was sitting in my garage, waiting for me to clean it up and maybe use it to organize some of my own tools. One evening, as I was finishing dinner, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I wiped my hands on a towel and headed to the door. Standing on my porch was a man I didn't recognize. He was probably in his late 40s with a wiry build, short brown hair, and a face that looked like it had seen its fair share of trouble. He wasn't threatening exactly, but something about his presence felt oppressive. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping the door only half open. "Yeah," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You bought a toolbox at a yard sale last week, right?" I stared for a moment, surprised. Yeah, why?" "It's mine," he said, leaning slightly closer. "It got sold by mistake. I need it back." Now, this didn't sit right with me. The man at the yard sale hadn't mentioned anything about it belonging to someone else. And even if it had been a mistake, I'd paid for it fair and square. Still, I tried to be polite. "I'm sorry, but I bought it from the owner. Are you sure it's the same one?" "It's the same one," he insisted. "Look, I don't want trouble. I just need my toolbox back." I held back for a second, sure there was more to it than he let on. "I'm sorry," I said again, firmer this time. "I bought it legally. If there's an issue, maybe you should talk to the guy who sold it." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "All right," he said, turning to leave, "but I'll be back." True to his word, he came back. 2 days later, I was watching TV when the doorbell rang again. This time I didn't answer right away. I peeked through the peephole and saw him standing there, looking more agitated than before. "Hey!" he shouted, knocking harder. "I know you're in there. Just give me the toolbox and I'll leave you alone." I didn't respond. Something about his tone made me feel uneasy, like he wasn't just some guy looking to reclaim his property. After a few minutes, he gave up and left, but not before pacing back and forth on my porch like a caged animal. The visits continued over the next few days, each one more intense than the last. He'd show up at random times, early in the morning, late at night, and pound on the door, yelling about the toolbox. Once, I heard him try the doorknob and my stomach dropped as I realized I hadn't locked it. I quickly bolted it and called a friend. "Dude, this guy's unhinged," my friend said. "You need to call the cops." I was hesitant. He hadn't technically done anything illegal yet, and I didn't want to escalate the situation. But when he came back a week later and tried to force his way inside, I knew I couldn't just let it go. I needed to deal with it. It was late, around 10 p.m., and I was in the kitchen cleaning up when I heard the pounding on the door. This time it wasn't just knocking. It was the sound of someone trying to shove the door open. "Open the door," he yelled. "I know you're in there." My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. As I waited for the operator, I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hands shaking. "I'm calling the police," I shouted through the door. "You need to leave." For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard him mutter something under his breath before retreating. I stayed on the line with the operator until the police arrived, explaining everything to the officer who came to my door. "Do you know this guy?" the officer asked. "No," I said. "But he's been coming around for the past week, saying the toolbox I bought belongs to him." The officer nodded. "We'll file a report and keep an eye out. If he comes back, don't hesitate to call us." That night, I kept thinking about the toolbox, wondering why it was so important to him. Was it sentimental? Did it have something hidden inside? I went to the garage and opened it up, sifting through the tools one by one. Nothing seemed unusual, just the same old wrenches and screwdrivers I'd seen when I bought it. But then I noticed something odd. The bottom of the toolbox had a false panel. I pried it open with a screwdriver. I was stunned, breathless by what was hidden underneath. Inside were several small plastic bags filled with what looked like white powder. My stomach dropped as the realization hit me. Drugs. The man hadn't been after the toolbox. He'd been after his stash. The next morning, I took the toolbox straight to the police station and explained everything. The officer I spoke to seemed unsurprised, nodding grimly as he took my statement. "You did the right thing," he said. "We'll look into it, but I'd recommend being extra cautious for the next few weeks. If this guy knows you have his stash, he might not give up so easily." After leaving the police station, I tried to go about my day. Work, groceries, the usual. Life had to go on. It was late when I returned home. I couldn't stop thinking about all that had happened this past week. The officer I'd spoken with had been straightforward. Turning over the toolbox and its contents was the right move, but the man might not let things go so easily. They promised to investigate, but the officer's parting words stuck with me. "Be cautious." As I pulled into my driveway, something immediately felt wrong. The porch light, which I always left on, was off, leaving the front of my house in eerie darkness. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat and stepped out of the car, scanning the area. Then I saw it. The front door was wide open, the lock shattered and hanging loosely from the frame. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me as I froze, staring at the gaping doorway. For a moment, I debated calling the police again, but the urge to know what was happening in my own home was stronger. I dialed 911, keeping the operator on the line, and cautiously stepped inside. The scene was chaos. The living room looked like a tornado had blown through it. Cushions thrown from the couch, shelves emptied and papers scattered everywhere. My heart pounded as I moved deeper into the house. The kitchen was no better. Every cabinet door hung open, dishes smashed on the floor, and even the contents of the fridge had been dumped onto the counter. As I turned down the hallway toward the bedrooms, I heard the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps. My pulse quickened, and I pressed myself against the wall, straining to listen. The back door slammed, and I caught a glimpse of two men sprinting into the backyard, disappearing into the shadows beyond my fence. I wanted to chase them, to yell, to do something, but fear rooted me to the spot. Instead, I waited a moment, making sure they were truly gone, before continuing to survey the damage. My bedroom was completely trashed. Closets yanked open, the mattress overturned, and every drawer pulled from the dresser and dumped onto the floor. It didn't take a detective to figure out what they'd been after. The toolbox. The police had it now, safely tucked away in an evidence locker. But those men didn't know that. They'd been watching me, waiting for me to leave, so they could break in and retrieve it themselves. The realization sent a chill down my spine. These men weren't just petty thieves. They were desperate, willing to tear apart my house and risk getting caught, to get their hands on their stash. And now they knew it was gone. The police arrived a short time later. I explained what had happened, describing the two men as best I could, though I hadn't seen their faces clearly in the dark. The officers took a report, checked the house, and assured me they'd increase patrols in the area. "Do you think they'll come back?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts to stay calm. "It's possible," one of the officers admitted, "but now that they know the toolbox isn't here, they might move on. Either way, we'll keep an eye out, make sure to install new locks, and consider adding some cameras." The next few days, I had the locks replaced, installed a security system, and stayed with a friend while I tried to process everything. The sense of violation was overwhelming. My home, my safe space had been invaded, and it was hard to shake the feeling that someone was still watching. I still find myself looking over my shoulder every time I come home, scanning for unfamiliar cars or figures lingering nearby. The police haven't updated me on their investigation, and I don't know if they ever caught the man from the yard sale or his accomplices. Thankfully, the man never came back. I don't know if the police caught him, or if he decided the risk wasn't worth it. Either way, I was stuck in a constant state of paranoia, always checking behind me outside. Looking back, I realize how naive I was to think a yard sale could be so harmless. What started as a nostalgic purchase turned into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. When you work in IT, people assume you've got the latest gadgets and cutting-edge tech at home. But honestly, while I deal with advanced systems at work, my weekends are spent tinkering with old consoles, vinyl records, and VHS tapes. Rewinding a tape is one of those small, comforting rituals, hearing that soft whirring sound and watching movies the way I did as a kid. So when I came across a yard sale with a box of tapes for only $5, it felt like hitting the jackpot. The sale was nothing special. The family who lived a few houses from mine was moving out and was getting rid of some old things. They had a few tables with mismatched items, and the man was sitting in a lawn chair sipping iced tea. I wasn't even looking for anything specific, but the box of tapes caught my eye. Most of them were old classics: E.T., The Goonies, Back to the Future, nostalgic gold. But buried beneath them was an unmarked black tape, its label peeled off, leaving a faint adhesive residue. It stood out, and I couldn't resist. I tossed the box in my trunk, ready to dive into a weekend of movie marathons. That night, after sorting through the tapes, I decided to save the unmarked one for last. It felt like opening a mystery box. You never know what you're going to get. Bootleg concert footage? A home video someone forgot about? Something weird and hilarious? The possibilities were endless. I popped the tape into my old VCR, grabbed a beer, and settled in. The static noise greeted me as the screen lit up and the footage began. It was grainy, like an old home movie shot on one of those clunky camcorders from the 80s or 90s. The image stabilized, showing a family, a man, woman, and 2 kids sitting in a cozy living room. They were laughing, talking, and passing around a bowl of popcorn. The sound was muffled, but it seemed like a normal family moment. At first, I thought nothing of it, just some random home video. But as I kept watching, something about the scene tugged at the back of my mind. The furniture arrangement, the wallpaper, it all felt familiar. I squinted at the screen, trying to place it, and then it hit me. The living room on the tape wasn't just familiar. It was mine, my house, my living room. I leaned closer to the screen. Sure enough, the layout matched perfectly. The couch positioned against the far wall, the old fireplace with a chipped mantel, the small alcove where I kept my bookshelf. Even the faded floral wallpaper was unmistakable, but the tape looked like it was from decades ago, long before I'd moved in. I paused the tape and stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. My house had been built in the late 80s, and I'd bought it 5 years ago from an older couple who'd owned it for ages. Maybe this was footage of them? But no. The people on the tape were younger, probably in their 30s, and the kids looked around 8 or 9. I didn't remember seeing any photos of kids when I toured the house. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe this was a family who'd lived here before the older couple. I hit play again, determined to see how it played out. As the video continued, the family's laughter seemed to die down. The kids looked nervously toward the edge of the frame, and the parents exchanged tense looks. I didn't remember seeing any photos of kids when I toured the house. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe this was a family who'd lived here before the older couple. I hit play again, determined to see how it played out. As the video continued, the family's laughter seemed to die down. The kids looked nervously toward the edge of the frame, and the parents exchanged tense looks. It was subtle at first. Little shifts in their expressions, their body language, but soon it became clear that something had changed. The man whispered something to the woman, and she nodded, pulling the kids closer to her. My heart felt heavy as I watched, completely glued to what I was seeing. The camera panned slightly, revealing more of the room. Shadows flickered against the far wall, moving unnaturally, like they didn't belong to the people in the room. One of the kids pointed toward the hallway off to the side, and the woman shook her head, holding him tighter. The tape began to distort, the image flickering with static, but I could still make out faint whispers in the background. The family looked terrified, their eyes darting toward the hallway as if expecting something to appear. The camera suddenly jolted, as if the filming had dropped it, and the screen filled with static for a moment. When the picture returned, the angle had shifted to the floor, showing the family's feet. The whispers grew louder, mixed with the muffled sound of the kids crying. Then came the thud, heavy like footsteps, but the source was off-screen. The tape cut out abruptly, leaving nothing but a black screen. I sat there, heart racing, trying to process what I'd just seen. My rational mind told me it was just an old home video, maybe some kind of prank or staged performance. I just couldn't get past the thought that it was all too real to be fake. I ejected the tape and set it aside, telling myself I'd take another look later. Maybe I'd missed something, some detail that would explain it all. But for the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the image of that family's terrified faces, the way they stared toward the hallway, as if something was coming for them. The next morning, I decided to watch the tape again in the daylight, hoping it wouldn't feel as unsettling. This time, I paid closer attention to the details, the way the family moved, the expressions on their faces. I noticed something I'd missed the night before, a small calendar hanging on the wall. The year on it was from nearly 3 decades ago, decades before I even thought about moving into this house. The family in the footage kept looking at the same spot off camera, their expressions growing more and more panicked. Then, just before the tape cut out, I saw it. A shadow, tall and angular, briefly crossed into the frame. It wasn't like any shadow I'd seen before, more like the absence of light itself. The family huddled together, their mouths moving as if screaming, though no sound came through, and then the screen went black. I rewound the tape several times, trying to figure out if it was some kind of special effect or a trick of the lighting, but it wasn't. The more I watched, the more it felt like something real. I couldn't let it go. I reached out to a neighbor who had lived on the street for decades, asking if they remembered the family who lived there before the old couple that sold me the house. They hesitated, clearly uneasy, before finally saying, "I don't like talking about it." They left. Suddenly, something about the house didn't sit right with them. When I asked what they meant, they just shook their head. From what I saw, they abandoned most of their stuff, like they were in a big hurry, and the house was closed for about 3 years before the last owners bought it. I stopped asking questions after that. The tape went back into the box, and the box went into the attic. I haven't touched it since. Every so often, though, I catch myself wondering what really happened to them. Whatever happened here before I came, I just hope it stays in the past. But sometimes, when the house is silent, I swear I hear the faint sound of whispers, just like on the tape. Yard sales have always been a kind of therapy for me. There's something oddly satisfying about rummaging through old items, finding that one hidden gem, and imagining the story behind it. I looked forward to these weekends. They gave me a break from the intensity of my job, a chance to unwind, and maybe find a treasure or two for my home. One Saturday morning, I grabbed my coffee, hopped in my car, and drove to a nearby neighborhood that was hosting a community-wide yard sale. The streets were crowded with people, folding tables overflowing with everything from dusty books to vintage knickknacks. I parked near a quiet cul-de-sac where a lone yard sale was set up under a massive oak tree. The sign caught my attention. Antiques and vintage finds. I strolled over, taking my time to browse through the collection. There were old cameras, ornate silverware sets, and even a vintage typewriter. But what caught my eye was a tall mirror leaning against the side of the house. Its frame was gilded gold, carved with vines and flowers, though it showed signs of wear. The glass was slightly warped, giving it that old-fashioned charm that instantly drew me in. I imagined it hanging in my living room, catching the afternoon sunlight. As I studied the mirror, the vendor, a man in his late 50s, walked over. He was wiry, with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes. Admiring the mirror, he asked, his voice calm, but with an undertone I couldn't quite place. "It's beautiful," I replied, running my fingers over the frame. How much? He hesitated, his hand resting protectively on the mirror's edge. It's special. Been in my family for generations. Are you sure it's what you're looking for? His reluctance caught me off guard. Most vendors I'd encountered were eager to sell, but he seemed almost possessive. I'm sure, I said, smiling. It would look perfect in my living room. He stared at me for a moment, then sighed. All right, but it's heavy. Let me deliver it to your house, it's no trouble. His insistence gave me a bad feeling. I could have easily fit the mirror in my car, but I didn't want to be rude. Knowing better, but doing it anyway, I agreed and gave him my address. A couple of hours later, his old pickup truck pulled into my driveway. I met him outside, planning to help carry the mirror in, but he waved me off. I've got it, he said, carefully unloading it and bringing it inside. He placed it against the wall in my living room and stood back, as if admiring his work. It looks good here, he said, his tone almost reverent. Take care of it. Thank you, I replied. But he lingered, his eyes scanning the room. It felt intrusive, like he was memorizing every detail. Finally, he left, and I locked the door behind him, feeling a strange sense of relief. That evening, I sat on the couch, admiring the mirror in its new spot. It was as stunning as I'd imagined, its golden frame catching the glow of the lamp. But as the night wore on, a faint unease crept in. I told myself it was just my overactive imagination, and went to bed. The next morning, as I stepped outside to grab the mail, I noticed a car parked across the street. It was an old blue sedan, its windows tinted. I didn't think much of it until later that afternoon when it was still there. I looked over, but I couldn't see who was inside. Shrugging it off, I went back inside. That evening, as I closed the curtains, I peeked outside again. The sedan was still parked there. This time I could make out the outline of a man sitting behind the wheel. My chest tightened when I realized it was the vendor from the yard sale. Why would he be parked outside my house? Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was visiting someone. But as the days passed, the sedan remained a constant presence, parked in the same spot for hours at a time. By the fourth day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I looked out the window and saw the sedan parked closer. This time, at the curb right in front of my house. My chest tightened as I saw the man sitting in the driver's seat, staring directly at my house. I decided to confront him. I stepped out onto my porch. My heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest as I crossed the yard. As soon as I reached the sidewalk, he started the car and drove off. I stood there for a moment. My hands were trembling. Was I overreacting? Maybe he had a perfectly innocent reason for being there. That night I couldn't sleep. The slightest noise in the house made me jump, and the mirror, once a beautiful addition to my home, now gave me the creeps. I moved it into the garage, covering it with an old sheet. The next evening, I was sitting in the living room when headlights flooded the front yard. I peeked through the curtains and saw the sedan parked in my driveway. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the man step out of the car and start walking toward the house. Panicking, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I whispered to the operator, explaining the situation as I locked the doors and windows. The man was pacing along the sidewalk, occasionally looking up at the windows. He didn't try to enter, but his presence was enough to chill me to the bone. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. The man jumped back into his car and sped off, disappearing into the night. When the police arrived, I described him, provided the car's plate number, and explained everything that had happened. The officer assured me they'd patrol the area and try to track him down. The man never returned, but I've never been able to forget it. I couldn't stop feeling paranoid, checking every lock and looking over my shoulder constantly. Eventually, I brought the mirror back up to the living room, hoping that seeing it in the light of day might help me reclaim some sense of normalcy. But even now, it doesn't feel like it's really mine. There's something about it, a heaviness, like it still belongs to him somehow. I haven't decided if I'm going to keep it or sell it, but for now, it just sits there. A quiet reminder of how easily something seemingly harmless can leave its shadow. To this day, I don't know what his intentions were. Was he just an eccentric man who became fixated on me? Or was there something darker at play? All I know is that I've stopped going to yard sales. And every time I see a car parked too long outside my house, I feel a pang of dread. Sometimes the things we bring into our lives come with more than we bargained for. I've always loved vintage furniture. The wear and tear, the little imperfections give it a unique story to tell. The moment I saw that vintage rocking chair at the yard sale, I knew I couldn't pass it up. It was charming in a way only old furniture can be. The dark wood was etched with delicate carvings of vines and leaves, and though the seat had a few scratches, it looked sturdy. I could already picture it in my living room, tucked into the corner by the window. "How much for the chair?" I asked, running my hand along the armrest. The woman running the sale barely looked at me as she muttered, $20. It was a steal, but her tone gave me pause. She seemed eager to get rid of it. "It's an antique, right?" I pressed, curious about its history. "It's old," she said, shrugging. "You want it or not?" Her dismissive attitude should have been a red flag, but I chalked it up to her just wanting to clear out her clutter. I handed her the $20, loaded the chair into my car, and drove home, excited to find the perfect spot for it. The chair fit perfectly by the bay window. I spent the rest of the afternoon rearranging my living room around it, placing a soft throw blanket over the back and a small rug underneath. By the time I was done, it looked like it had always been there. That evening, I sat in the chair for the first time with a book and a cup of tea. The wood creaked softly under my weight, the gentle rocking motion oddly soothing. Around 11 p.m., I turned off the lights and headed to bed. As I lay there in the dark, I heard it, a faint creaking sound coming from the living room. It was rhythmic, like someone gently rocking back and forth in the chair. I sat up, listening. The sound continued for a few moments before stopping. "It's just the wood settling," I told myself. Though my heart was racing, I rolled over and tried to sleep, but the sound stayed with me. The creaking became a nightly occurrence. Sometimes it was faint, other times louder, as if someone were pushing the chair harder. I started avoiding the living room at night, opting to stay in my bedroom with the door closed. One morning, I walked into the living room and froze. The chair was slightly out of place, angled toward the window. Maybe I bumped it, I thought, though I knew that wasn't true. I'd been careful not to touch it when I'd vacuumed the day before, and I lived alone. There was no one else who could have moved it. I shoved the chair back into place and went about my day, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the unease lingered. One night I decided to test the chair. After dinner, I sat in it for a while, rocking gently, trying to see if there was something mechanical about the movement or sound. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Before going to bed, I took a small piece of tape and placed it under one of the chair's legs, marking its position. If it moved again, I'd know for sure. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the loudest creaking yet. It was violent, the sound of wood straining as the chair rocked back and forth with force. I threw on my robe and ran into the living room. The chair was rocking furiously, the throw blanket draped over its back, slipping to the floor. "Stop it!" I shouted, though I wasn't sure who or what I was yelling at. The chair stopped abruptly, the room falling into eerie silence. My eyes darted to the tape mark. The chair had moved, several inches off its original spot. That was the first time I truly felt afraid. I left the lights on that night and sat on the couch, watching the chair until dawn. The next evening, as I was locking up for the night, I heard something new. A faint whisper, low and unintelligible, coming from the living room. I inched closer to the doorway, heart pounding. The whispering grew louder, though I still couldn't make out the words. It seemed to be coming from the chair. "Who's there?" The whispering stopped. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and called my friend Anna. "I need you to come over," I said, fighting to maintain a calm tone. Anna arrived 20 minutes later, rolling her eyes when I told her about the chair. "You're just hearing things," she said, plopping down on the couch. But then the creaking started again. Anna froze, her eyes widening as she stared at the chair. "Okay," she whispered. "That's not normal." The final straw came 2 nights later. I decided to sleep in the living room, thinking maybe my presence would keep the chair from moving. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a loud bang. The chair was rocking violently, slamming against the wall with each swing. The throw blanket had fallen to the floor. I jumped up, backing away as the chair continued its relentless movement. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house, not stopping until I was safely in. It looked like it had always been there. That evening, I sat in the chair for the first time with a book and a cup of tea. The wood creaked softly under my weight, the gentle rocking motion oddly soothing. Around 11 p.m., I turned off the lights and headed to bed. As I lay there in the dark, I heard it, a faint creaking sound coming from the living room. It was rhythmic, like someone gently rocking back and forth in the chair. I sat up, listening. The sound continued for a few moments before stopping. It's just the wood settling, I told myself. Though my heart was racing, I rolled over and tried to sleep, but the sound stayed with me. The creaking became a nightly occurrence. Sometimes it was faint, other times louder, as if someone were pushing the chair harder. I started avoiding the living room at night, opting to stay in my bedroom with the door closed. One morning, I walked into the living room and froze. The chair was slightly out of place, angled toward the window. Maybe I bumped it, I thought, though I knew that wasn't true. I'd been careful not to touch it when I'd vacuumed the day before, and I lived alone. There was no one else who could have moved it. I shoved the chair back into place and went about my day, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the unease lingered. One night I decided to test the chair. After dinner, I sat in it for a while, rocking gently, trying to see if there was something mechanical about the movement or sound. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Before going to bed, I took a small piece of tape and placed it under one of the chair's legs, marking its position. If it moved again, I'd know for sure. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the loudest creaking yet. It was violent, the sound of wood straining as the chair rocked back and forth with force. I threw on my robe and ran into the living room. The chair was rocking furiously, the throw blanket draped over its back, slipping to the floor. "Stop it!" I shouted, though I wasn't sure who or what I was yelling at. The chair stopped abruptly, the room falling into eerie silence. My eyes darted to the tape mark. The chair had moved, several inches off its original spot. That was the first time I truly felt afraid. I left the lights on that night and sat on the couch, watching the chair until dawn. The next evening, as I was locking up for the night, I heard something new. A faint whisper, low and unintelligible, coming from the living room. I inched closer to the doorway, heart pounding. The whispering grew louder, though I still couldn't make out the words. It seemed to be coming from the chair. "Who's there?" The whispering stopped. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and called my friend Anna. "I need you to come over," I said, fighting to maintain a calm tone. Anna arrived 20 minutes later, rolling her eyes when I told her about the chair. "You're just hearing things," she said, plopping down on the couch. But then the creaking started again. Anna froze, her eyes widening as she stared at the chair. "Okay," she whispered. "That's not normal." The final straw came 2 nights later. I decided to sleep in the living room, thinking maybe my presence would keep the chair from moving. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a loud bang, The chair was rocking violently, slamming against the wall with each swing. The throw blanket had fallen to the floor. I jumped up, backing away as the chair continued its relentless movement. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house, not stopping until I was safely in.